Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first roundtable of this fall. My name is Haley Thompson, and I am a development intern for PLATO. Ariel Sykes is going to be leading our roundtable today, and I'm just going to give a brief introduction, then pass it off to her. So, Ariel is the Assistant Director of the Ethics Institute at Kent Place School and serves on PLATO's Board of Directors. She has worked in philosophy for children community for over 10 years and specializes in dialogic teaching strategies, argumentation, and ethics instruction. She received her BA from Mount Holyoke College and her MA from Teachers College, Columbia University in the field of philosophy and education. Ariel is the co-founder of the New York City High School Ethics Bowl and an endorsed practitioner of the Institute for the Advancement of Philosophy for Children. And with that, if you want to take it from there.
Great, thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you zooming in various different time zones to join PLATO on this conversation around successful teaching practices in philosophy for children. You'll notice in the chat, and this will also be available on the PLATO website along with this little brief introduction video, some resources that I'll be referencing throughout my little introductory remarks, and then we will stop recording and have a conversation where we can share our own tips or strategies, pose questions that we have faced or would like to have insight on others' ideas around similar challenges to facilitation in philosophy for children. So bear with me while I just give us a bit of a context of what we will be talking about today. So what I would like to talk about in terms of facilitating successful discussions in philosophy for children is anchoring it around what we mean about when we say philosophical discussions, why we think having these discussions with people of all ages is important, because we know philosophy for children practices can be used with adults of all ages, not just children. And then get into the well, now that we know what we're doing and why we're doing it, how does that translate into our practice? And how can we make sure that we're being successful in our role as facilitator? So when we think about what we're facilitating, we're facilitating a philosophical engagement, not any other type of engagement. We're talking about a philosophical one among the participants engaged in the dialogue. This means that it needs to be shared and driven by the participants' interests. So this looks like things like centering on contestable questions, making sure that the dialogue is centered on students so that the facilitator is supporting the students' conversation and guiding them, but not prescribing what is to be considered. And making sure that the conversation is happening in a way that it's meaningful to everyone engaged in the conversation. People are engaging in it and you're not, having people check out, and that it's accessible so that all members of the community can feel like they can share their ideas and dialogue with one another. So in this way, a successful philosophical engagement is one that looks like productive dialogue, and not like productive in the sense that there's an end goal and that there's only one prescribed answer, but productive in the sense that it produces something new for the participants, both individually, they arrive at new insights about themselves, the concept, or others, but also that it's new as a collective engagement. And this can feel challenging for some facilitators when we're engaging in questions that, if we are well-trained or well-read in philosophy, we might have felt like we've done 100 times and we already know the possible answers. So the importance of making sure that we think about it's productive for the participants. They're the center and the focus of our engagement. All of our philosophy for children practices, whether we engage in the IAPC model, the picture book model, models that have been very successful in the UK or Australia or other countries, they look different, right? But we can all say that there are some core fundamental structures that look similar across all different practices. So I want to posit that maybe those structures are these 6 things, and they're going to look different in terms of how often they are used within one engagement in a philosophy for children session, or how much is focused in each one of these areas. But we'll always find that there is some type of stimulus or experience in which the participants are asked to engage with that provokes questions. And then, of course, questions can either be generated by participants or posed by the facilitator. Different practices have different opinions about what is better and why. You'll always see some type of dialogue happening, and this is the inquiry stage. This helps us arrive at stage 4, which is around judgment. We're asking participants to arrive at judgments around contestable questions. We would then hope that this judgment leads to some self-reflection, both reflection on the inquiry process, how did the group do at dialoguing around these questions today, but also reflection on, do I still think the same as I thought before I entered into this discussion today? And lastly, any good philosophical practice isn't just one that's cognitive. It should also lead to behavioral changes in one's own environment. An examined life is one that requires that we act on our new arrived judgments. So that's this action stage that might look like testing out our theories in practice, which then cycle back to stage 1. We test something out that we thought was well-reasoned. We notice that there's some complications in practice, causes us to engage in a new stimulus, and then we're back on this trajectory of the 6 stages. What's important here is knowing that as a facilitator, you're facilitating each one of these experiences. You're a facilitator when you choose your stimulus. You're a facilitator when you're helping students arrive at the questions they want to explore with you or that you're using to engage them. We obviously think about facilitation as being very heavy in the inquiry stage, but you're also a facilitator in providing space and opportunities for students to reflect on their judgments, reflect on what they've learned, and reflect on how this can inform how they live and act in the world. Secondly, it's also important to notice that when we facilitate in these different spaces, we activate same common principles because we all believe that philosophy for children engages particular skills and dispositions that we think are important. So that gets me to the why. Why do we facilitate philosophical conversations with children? So I like to say that we probably engage with children around these philosophical questions because we already have the belief that children are philosophical and they have philosophical experiences in the world, and that they need time and space to make meaning of their questions and their experiences in the world. And they might not find opportunities to engage with one another or other adults around these types of questions in their normal schooling environment. So we think that children are capable of philosophical thinking and dialogue, and that we need to help allow them to have conversations that they feel are productive, where disagreements and different points of views are welcome and often required in order for us to arrive at well-reasoned judgments. And we believe that this is important generally because we think it helps inform or develop particular types of dispositions or character traits that we value. And depending on where you're situated in the world, these might align with different types of ideals or values of your society or political nature. In America, we like to think that philosophy for children helps with democratic ideals, that we're teaching students to listen carefully to one another, for them to be able to articulate their ideas and questions, for them to be able to evaluate reasons, but evaluate them with one another in respectful ways so that they can decide what they individually think about an issue, that they're able to build on the ideas of others, and that they see actually that learning and knowledge and understanding in the world requires a group effort that is better done in dialogue with each other. And we also will often think about how types of philosophical engagement can support the development of empathy or pro-social behavior if we want to activate some social emotional skill development as well. So this gets me to one of the core principles of my practice. In my introduction, we talked about how I've been very involved in argument literacy and argument development as a core feature of dialogue. And so it is my belief that philosophical conversations with children help reinforce strong reasoning and judgment skills, because we're asking students to do philosophy, not just learn about philosophy or philosophers. And this helps strengthen children's capacities to recognize the philosophical aspects of their experience. It helps them learn how to think carefully and It helps them to consider what is a sound alternative and when and how we should consider different perspectives. It allows them to develop dispositions of self-corrective behavior, right? So when we know when to change our mind in light of reasonable evidence and sound reasoning. And that gets us into the how. Okay. So here, how do we think about philosophical facilitation with children? I tend to talk about them in these two core ways, that we have to make sure that when we're facilitating, as a philosopher, I'm constantly checking to see whether or not the conversation is staying within the philosophical realm. Is it grounded? Is the question grounded? Or the concept grounded? Is the discussion grounded in what I understand philosophy to be? And when it's not, then I intervene to help keep the conversation focused in this way. When I think about how I intervene as a philosopher in facilitating these discussions, I hold a mantra that's pretty common within the IAPC community, which is to say, I'm content weak and process strong. While I might know a lot about philosophy and the specific question or concept being explored by the students, I'm not telling them what I think or what the different philosophers have thought. If I'm doing that, I might be engaging in some philosophical instruction, but I'm not engaging in philosophical dialogue where the students' ideas are centered. Instead, I refrain from acting like an expert and instead offer as a guide to help make sure that the process of the discussion, that we're following the ground rules and we're making progress towards answering the larger question. And that's all I'm doing. I'm in service of the students and their exploration of the question. So this also means that we might think about the types of thinking that children are engaging and how I, as a facilitator, am supporting them in terms of the 3 C's, which is also a pretty common refrain in the IAPC space. So we talk about philosophical engagements as involving creative thinking, caring thinking, and critical thinking. And there's a lot to unpack here in terms of the literature around critical, creative, and caring thinking. But briefly, we think about creative thinking in an inquiry as one in which how can the facilitator support the use of metaphors, similes, or examples to help illuminate the complexity of an idea in a tangible way that helps with shared understanding in the group? How can the facilitator help students generate rich examples or counterexamples to test out their emerging theories? Critical thinking also looks like, as a facilitator, my ability to map, diagram, or summarize the ideas being shared by the participants. My ability to organize and conceptualize the progress of the group is a creative act. And when I ask students to explore an idea or translate an idea that they've heard from another participant, their reinterpretation of another person's idea is also a creative act. We can also see creative thinking happening in the joy and silliness that might be embedded within the discussion based on the dynamics between the participants and the facilitator and the age of the students. When we think about caring thinking, we can thinking about caring about the participants in the group, but we can also think about caring for the ideas in the discussion. And so there's this balance that has to be made between making sure that everybody feels included, they're able to bring their full selves to the discussion and share ideas without fear of reprimand or bias. But we also want to balance that with the consideration of caring for the ideas, taking them seriously enough that we can examine them to develop our best and strongest hypothesis for the question at hand. So caring thinking can also mean figuring out what is the important bit of this question that we need to explore? Why is the answer to this question important for my life? How can I take the ideas of others seriously? This can look for a facilitator like me helping clarify ideas or asking students to clarify ideas of one another. We're taking the time to be careful in our listening and speaking. It can look like how I respond to possible disagreements that happen in a discussion, especially when they diverge from the norms of the space and become something that's a little more aggressive and not welcome. In critical thinking, we can think about the ways in which the facilitator is helping students consider why they think what they think. So they can be calling for reasons evaluating criteria, offering or asking students to offer examples or counterexamples. It can be asking students to consider the implications, being sensitive to how one theory might not work in all contexts without telling them what those contexts are or what those limitations are, but allowing the students to get there by themselves. And I often find that as a facilitator, one of my strongest critical thinking moves is the calling for the identification of warrants. What are the things that we're taking for granted that link our position to our claim? This can also be, critical thinking can be the way in which we navigate disagreement and self-corrective thinking in a space. What I would like to impress on everyone watching is that a good facilitator in philosophy for children only intervenes in a way that advances the inquiry. It's not about what I want or what I think, or if I set a goal for myself, like I'm going to practice warrants today. If it's not needed in the discussion, I'm not doing it. I read what is going on in the discussion and figure out what I can do to help the students advance. So when we think about, wow, this is a lot of stuff, how can I translate into this by practice? There are plenty of facilitation frameworks out there within the Philosophy for Children movement, which have been offered in the chat and will be linked to this video later. I want to share two that have been really helpful for me in becoming a better practitioner. One is the framework that was developed as part of a research study on argument literacy. So while it wasn't not explicitly philosophy for children, I find that it still helps guide my practice. And it's developed by Ian Wilkinson and Alina Resnitskaya. So contributions within an inquiry, whether we're talking about a facilitator or a student participant, are in these four categories, essentially. They're shared, so they're offering something that's helping the group explore the same idea from different perspectives. We have a shared context, we're working collectively towards something. It's clear, so we are thinking about how our language is being accessible to everyone and that our structures of our argumentation or speech are such that other people can follow. We're committed to using acceptable logic. So we're using reasons and evidence that are well examined and accurate. And then connected to that is logical. We think of the ways in which our positions and reasons and evidence are connected. And this can be activated by participants or facilitators. So I can ask myself, am I being a successful facilitator? Well, are we focusing on the main question that everybody picked or that I offered the group? Are we sharing responsibilities and who's doing the talking? Are we considering more than one answer to this question, or are we kind of all focused on just one? When I'm thinking about clear, I can be like, how can I make this clearer for others? How might I help clarify the ideas of others? Are there ways in which the facilitator is mapping or tracking the discussion so that everybody can follow? When I think about acceptable, I might think about, are we evaluating our criteria, our facts, our values? Or are we just going around and sharing and listing different ideas without testing them out? And when I'm thinking about logical, I'm thinking about, are we articulating our reasons and how they connect to our positions? And are we evaluating the inferences that we might be making? The second framework that I'd like to talk about is one that was developed by one of my mentors, Joe Euler, at the IAPC in his dissertation. And he evaluated what strong facilitators do in order to ensure a productive conversation. And he came up with a series of moves that a facilitator engages in. And I've kind of categorized them into three chunks that kind of align with what I think are the core commitments of philosophical practice in philosophy for children. So one is making sure that it's centered on the community and the ideas of the group so that everybody can have a fruitful discussion. It's feeling productive and inclusive. So that includes, as a facilitator, am I paraphrasing people? Am I distilling, picking out what the big nugget is and what they just said? Am I summarizing periodically 3 or 4 times during the discussion to make sure that everybody's following and that I'm not lost? Because if I'm lost as a facilitator, the group's going to be lost too, probably. The second is thinking about logic, reasoning, and acceptability. And so am I calling for warrants, kind of surfacing them if I'm seeing them? Am I ensuring and holding all the students accountable to strong reasoning? And the last one is making sure that the group is centered on the task at hand, which is to make progress on the larger question that we agreed to. So I'm locating how their idea connects to other people's ideas, like how it fits into the puzzle of the discussion. I'm helping students develop the metacognitive awareness of how a discussion works and the type of thinking moves they can engage in by naming things like, so you're making a distinction, you're adding another example, things like that. And I'm redirecting anytime the conversation goes off on a tangent that's not in service to the bigger question. So I might say things like, so how does that help us answer the question? Are you saying that this is a possible problem with the question, or are we exploring a different topic here? And of course, if the group decides to redirect and collectively decide to go off on a tangent, that's fine too, but it needs to be a collective decision that they're aware of. So with that, I think that I'm about out of time. So I just would like to reiterate that when we engage in successful philosophical practice, we need to be mindful of the spaces that we're working in, what our goals are, and intervene in a way that supports and doesn't undermine those. And I'm hoping that the different frameworks I provided today are helpful in starting our conversation.